you shouldn't be the same person you were last year at this time. Hopefully you've advanced, not gone backwards.
Sure.
But some people do. You still need to grow as a human being and evolve continuously. We're all about evolution. And even as we get older, and I'm learning as I'm getting older, is really understanding about evolving. You got to still be learning and growing. I mean, I work out in the gym probably harder than I've ever have at 60 years old because I want to continue to get better.
We're back for our newest episode, and this one is all about being more self-aware and understanding what that is. And Jon, I think you have a really good quote that's going to start us off, that we can get into a bit more about why this is so important and understanding why self-awareness is important. And we also, on this episode, have a few questions that came in over the last week or so from a few listeners that I think will be a great addition.
Excellent.
To cover on this episode as well. So with that, here's Jon with that quote.
All right. So we're going to talk about awareness today. What I really want to talk about is not only just self-awareness, but awareness of people, whether that's customers, employees, or just everyday people who you deal with. And it really comes down to, it starts off with wisdom, because wisdom is always that learning curve that we learn from different things. We draw wisdom upon things, but one of the quote, and again, I don't know the author, and I think I kind of pieced this together, but I love it. It's really around wisdom. Wisdom isn't just about knowing your own strengths, but it's about knowing your weaknesses. And I love the quote because it really kind of tells a story. If you go back, I was a comic book fan and I loved Superman. And one thing we knew, which really made Superman even more vulnerable, really more vulnerable as a person, but also made him this amazing powerhouse. But we knew one thing. We knew he had X-ray vision. We knew he was stronger. He could bend steel with his bare hands and so forth. But we did know his weakness. His weakness was kryptonite, right? And, I think every day before Superman probably went out, he probably said to himself, I hope there's no kryptonite around. I don't want to deal with this. But the reality is knowing your weakness is a strength. And his strength was knowing his weakness in a lot of ways. So I wanted to point that out in the beginning because I think it's important as we go down the path of learning about self-awareness. It's about understanding what you're good at, understanding what you're not good at.
When did you kind of realize like how important being self-aware and, understanding the essence of actually being aware of yourself and everything like that became very important to moving forward in a lot of different things in your life? When was it that it kind of hit you?
You know what? I've always been intrigued by people that are human. The people we look up to that will tell you stories about themselves and talk about their weaknesses and talk about it. And I think that that's a good trait for an individual to have, is to be aware of that. I think it's really having full knowledge of who you are rather than what people think you are. And I think the being able to show your the bad things and the good things about yourself is important, and being able to talk about that. So I've always seen that as a strength. I've kind of used that a lot of my life, but I think more and more as I got more successful in a weird way, I got a little bit more vulnerable to be able to show what my weaknesses are, and what my, and what I can't do. I draw wisdom from that. I draw wisdom by understanding that of other people, what they're good at, what they're bad at.
Right. The Superman thing is interesting because, or really any superhero or movie or novel that you read, when you know, as the viewer, as the watcher, when you're aware of what their weakness is and you're kind of self-aware of your own weakness at the same time, sometimes you almost live a little bit vicariously through that character in a way. But at the same time, when you're aware of their weakness. When you're aware that Superman's, his kryptonite's going to basically hurt him, you want him to succeed at the same time.
Yeah.
You want him to make sure that it doesn't, come around. So do you think that also letting people, making other people aware that you're self-aware of your own weaknesses, of the things that can hurt you, do you think that's a benefit, or do you think that's, kind of a little bit of a downfall to kind of keep that to yourself?
No, I think it's a benefit to the people you want to know that, the people that care about you. Certainly people could use that against you, of course, right? Everybody knew Superman had this weakness. So let's go get kryptonite and, rob a bank and surround the area with kryptonite, and he can't get to us. So, it could be used as a ploy to get to you, but that's not what the purpose is for doing this. What the purpose is really understanding within yourself too. Is really taking account of, what, I'm good at this and I'm not good at this. And when you're hiring somebody and understanding their strengths and weaknesses, we've gone through, and at some point we'll talk more about this, but there's a lot of really cool tests that are out there to find people's strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
And I've done it with employees. I don't recall the name of the test, but there were some really great ones. It was almost like creating a book of that person and knowing, it's almost like having directions. Like Craig Brower comes in for a job. Craig shows up and he takes the test, and I look at it and say, Craig is great at engaging with people. Craig can do, certain things really well, but organizationally, he's not very organized. He's got to get better at being organized. Here's a way to work with Craig. Here's a way to, when you have conversations with Craig, you can make a point of what's important. Let him understand what's important. So you guys can get through, you don't have to waste your time with Craig, and you can get through those points. And you can highlight what's important. So it really does open up, ways of being able to find out what people are strong at, what people are weak at, what they're really good at, what they can get better at, or what they shouldn't do at all, which is probably another major thing too, trying to figure out what they can't do. Right.
And that's one of the things that you've said, even on past episodes, that even with companies that you've invested in with the venture capital and all that, is that you care more about knowing if the person's aware of their weaknesses over their strengths, and being able to see that. And like you've said, it's not the horse, it's the jockey. So that's a huge thing, that not only you realize it's important for yourself, but also to understand about other people.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm trying to draw back in my mind. There was an interesting project. It was called Dunning-Kruger, and it was called the Dunning-Kruger, I believe, effect. And it was something like this. It was like people who have limited skills at certain tasks or jobs seem to overestimate their knowledge. And yet people with high skills and knowledge tend to underestimate their skills and knowledge. And I don't know what that says. I think it's more about awareness. Again, it really goes back to people awareness, but it's kind of an interesting thing that, there are groups of people that think they're really good at things. And I've had that experience, in hiring people. I think I made this comment before, but it was a guy I brought in as a, chief operating officer. So he was a high end person. I was CEO, and I hired him as my COO. And this was way back, right when I kind of learned how to be a CEO. So this was, 20 some odd years ago. And when I brought him in, and like the first day or two at the job, I realized I made a mistake. And the mistake was, I asked him during those first couple of days, what are you good at and what are you bad at? And his response was, I'm really good at everything. There's really not anything I'm bad at. And that was like, whoa, it hit me. And I tried to get past it, but 3 months into that relationship, I ended up letting him go.
Right.
And it was because he wasn't really good at a lot of things. I learned that, and I knew it when he said that to me. All of a sudden it came out, and I was like, boy, did I make a mistake.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ride through it. I wanted to support him and help him. But that's a typical good example of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
It's with that too. I mean, I've been in situations too where I'm talking to somebody who's educated on a topic much more than I am. And it happens actually when I go to the doctor a lot of times. The doctor will end up telling you, and probably you've seen similar things. You go to the doctor, they tell you a whole bunch of things, and you're like, okay, this is a little bit, past my pay grade. I don't really know what you're talking about too much here. And I'm sure that I've done it before too. When I start talking about something, I kind of just assume that everybody kind of knows already what you know when you have a certain level of experience. Right. Is that kind of part of it? Part of it as well is also kind of assuming that people know as much as you do because you don't realize how much of an expert you really are.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with, people, you want to make sure you got a good gauge of your audience. You got a good gauge of the people you're in front of and want to communicate well with them. I think the yearning of getting up in front of someone or a crowd is that you want to be able to connect with all of them. And, the truth is you can't connect with everyone because not everyone is on the same level, but you want to get to a point where there's a median point where you believe that majority of the people understand and relate to what you're doing and saying. So that's kind of the way I look at it when you're communicating with other people and you want to be able to not overshoot the audience with all the knowledge that you have.
Right. And is there kind of ways that you can walk your way in or out of a situation like that is kind of just like a technique that you use when you're talking to somebody and they just have that face on like, oh, just really don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I guess the best thing is just to stop and reevaluate the situation.
Yeah.
It's hard to walk, you can walk some things back, but it's hard to do that. And I've done that. I've done where I've talked so fast. I mean, I have this issue with my wife. My wife will say to me, you're talking, but I don't even understand what you're talking about. And part of it is that I have the conversation in my head before I'm talking to her. So I'll be like, yeah, that thing. And she's like, what thing? What are you talking about? So yes, I have to stop every once in a while, regroup. She makes me very aware that I'm overshooting.
Right. Now, my wife does the same thing, especially, and we've talked about it before with the ADHD. It's something that I think, I've recently found out that with ADHD as well, it's creative people and people that are, a lot of people that are entrepreneurs have ADHD or ADD, and it can affect you in different ways. But having to kind of pull yourself back. And then that's why I asked that question, because I know there's times where I have to either pull back or, and things like that. And it's self-awareness is a very a big thing to kind of figure out and understand. Have there been any programs or books or anything that you've kind of read or learned about, or was it just something that kind of came innate that you just realized that you had to kind of work on and understand?
Well, I can go back to The Road Less Traveled, right? And, one of the comments he talked about is, and it's really true. I mean, we live in a very, a world where you could do 50 things at once, right? And, with the younger crowd, they tend to, work and listen to music and everything else. But one of the things M. Scott Peck talked about was it's really hard to listen to someone else and do something else at the same time. I think the commitment to having a conversation is a commitment, and you need to give 100% of your effort. And to even help someone with a problem or question, you have to stop and let everything else go and kind of think through that question. And even if it causes you stress thinking through the answer. But in order to be a good conversationist and a good boss and a good connection or a good, a good vendor when you're doing business with someone is to really understand what that person is dealing with and what their problem is. So the deeper you dig, the more you can be supportive to those people, and the more you can find out an answer to their issue that you want to help them solve. Whether that's product, service, whatever you're offering.
And that goes back even to our previous episode with the 10,000 punches, and really spending that time to not necessarily work on your own punch 10,000 times, but understand or use those 10,000 punches or 10,000 hours, principle to really understand your customers, your clients.
Right. Understanding that guy that knows how to throw that one punch or 10 punches, 10,000 times. That's the guy you got to be aware with. That's the guy you get in the ring with that kicks your ass, because he's good at very few things, but the things he's good at is that. There were these years ago. There were a couple of these heavyweights. One guy was Jerry Cooney. People remember him, but he was a heavyweight boxer, and he had this amazing left hook. And if you ever, his problem was he had one punch. It's nice to have about 10 of those that you're really good at, but he had this amazing left hook. And man, if you got caught with that left hook, you're going down. And he won like 40 fights in a row with literally the same knockout punch.
Right.
Until he was figured out, and never ended up winning a championship. But boy, was he devastating. And he threw that punch in practice. Right. He became an expert at throwing a left hook. So it's kind of interesting. Yes, you want to have an arsenal. You want to, have these certain skills, but you can't have too many of them. Too many of them makes you average. Right. Too little makes you, kind of a one-trick pony.
Yeah.
But just enough makes you really devastating.
Right. And studying that too. Studying, he won 40-something fights.
Yeah.
He lost to the guy that actually spent the time studying what he needed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you block that left hook?
Yeah.
Or how do you get to him before he gets that to you? Yeah. Absolutely.
So what do you think the difference might be then? People will go out and practice their punches. They'll go out and they'll say, okay, I think I practiced this enough. I'm confident enough in this. What's the difference between being too self-confident and not so self-aware? And is there a way to kind of differentiate that or really, understand that maybe I should have worked on this punch a couple different punches so I wouldn't lose that 42nd fight or 43rd fight? Did my confidence get in the way?
Yeah. Confidence is, again, it could be, understanding yourself real good so you know what you're good at. And that brings on confidence. Or you can have, phony confidence, which really is that I'm good at it. I'm good at this, but I'm really not that good at this. And I don't spend the time being good at this. So how do you, so there's a false confidence and then there's real confidence. Depending, false confidence certainly is going to produce failure. You're not going to get to where you need to be.
Right.
If you're pretending and making up a story about yourself and you're living off that story, you're eventually going to be found out. You're going to eventually fail at something that you just haven't spent time working on. You got to really have a full bag of knowledge of yourself. And more importantly, you got to continue to learn about yourself, because we are ever-changing beings. We're moving around, shaking, growing, heavier, thinner, stronger, faster, slower. We're constantly going in different directions. And so you got to get a handle on who you are, what you are at every given moment. There's a good quote, is if you're not ashamed of the person you were last year, you're not growing as a human being.
Right.
So therein lies a really interesting point. You shouldn't be the same person you were last year at this time. Hopefully you've advanced, not gone backwards.
Sure.
But some people do. But you still need to grow as a human being and evolve continuously, because we're all about evolution. And even as we get older, and I'm learning as I'm getting older, is really understanding about evolving. You got to still be learning and growing. I mean, I work out in the gym probably harder than I've ever have at 60 years old.
Right.
Because I want to continue to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take a little more. I understand myself. I know that it takes a little bit more in the gym, but I have a pretty decent understanding of myself.
Right.
Now tomorrow I might have to catch up and understand myself because things change so much. But.
Right. So, you have, you kind of have this list of 5 or 6 kind of core beliefs, that you go by, about embracing certain things and all that. And you have, you have some different philosophies than a lot of other, entrepreneurs out there that are talking about what it's like to be an entrepreneur and the successes and so forth. And I think it's worth kind of going over those 5 or 6 different things. But before we get into that, what you just kind of talked about, a lot of people out there, a lot of coaches, especially for startups and businesses will say, fake it until you make it. And a lot of people will try to do that. And in my opinion, I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you fake it till you make it, as long as you are progressing forward and not staying stagnant and saying, okay, I've been faking it since last year. I'm still faking it. And if you're faking it the same way, then you haven't grown. But if you're, I guess faking it till you make it should be more of a belief system and saying, this is what I want to get to.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of pretend I'm that now and work your way towards that.
Right.
How do you, in your experience with dealing with a lot of different entrepreneurs that have come in for investments and things like that with the angel investing and venture, and how would you be able to, is there a piece of advice that you would tell somebody that feels like maybe I'm faking it a little bit too much? And how do you fix that?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to some of these things where you talk about it's, bullshit until you make it, right? Bullshit people until you make it. So I think there's some clarity to that wording, fake it to him. I think it's really just about, having the confidence to move forward with things. So that's the, I don't even like the word fake it, but be positive until you get there. But as long as you're on the path. So, if you're faking that you're an expert at, finances until you finally become an expert at finances, but you're not really studying this and you're not really working hard at it in the business. So you're faking it and you're not really going to make it. You just, so you really need to, have an understanding that if you're going to do something, you're going to back something, you're going to push something, you got to have some weight behind you. And the weight behind you is studying, learning, gaining the wisdom, all those things of that particular thing. But don't just, go out there and bullshit people, because that comes out in the wash, especially when a company's pitching us. We ask questions. We sit down and start asking questions. We could blow it all up. And sometimes I get the feeling people are bullshitting. When I'm sitting there listening to them pitch their company, sure. I'm like, all right, let's talk about this. What exactly is your sales? What exactly are you doing? What exactly is your experience knowing this? Why do you know this? Are you going to fake your numbers till you make the numbers? No. You're not going to you're not going to put on your graph sheet that this is the number you're doing and you're doing 2 million now. You're doing 2 million now, and maybe 2 years from now you're going to do 152 million. You better explain to me why you're going to grow that high.
Sure.
What you're going to do.
Right.
So, that's my wrap up on that one. But yeah, you did mention that you wanted me to repeat a little bit about the stuff I talked about in the first episode.
Yeah.
So maybe I can give a little bit more color to it. And I just want people to understand, we are going to repeat some things, because repeating, I think, is natural. And I think it's things I deem very important. So when you do hear some things being repeated, it's not that I have a lack of things to say. It's just that I want to drive home a point. So yeah, it is my different kind of take on things. And I didn't do it to be different. I just did it because this is my entrepreneurial journey. Sure. And I know what's worked for me. And people are going to have to judge whether it works for them or not. But, I call it the embrace and don't embrace theory. There's 5 things there. So the first one is, number 1 is embracing ambiguity. And for me, that's kind of interesting. So realize that a business just begins, with a thought and an idea. And, to our point, push till you make it. You don't have to have a clear set goal at the end. You do have to have a plan, right? You write your plan down, you create, and you come up with a theory of where your goal is going to be. But understand that things can be ambiguous. And what's nice about starting a business and being ambiguous is that you do have a chance to pivot a bit. And when a lot of my companies, especially my early ones, and NHA that you worked for with me, did not start out what it ended up being. It was not intended to be what it was. But as the cloud started clearing, as the ambiguous process of it happened, it came together. And all great ideas, start with kind of ambiguous outcomes. But you just keep pushing forward. You keep pushing out your product, warts and all, or your service, warts and all. You'll learn. You can learn on the fly. Those are okay. Those are things that you can do. So embrace an ambiguous outcome. Embrace it. Don't feel like I got to have everything clear in the beginning.
And I think there's a lot of businesses, and there's even a lot of things that have happened in my life that the plan went in a much different direction.
Yeah.
But led me to a much better outcome.
Yep.
Because of the fact that I allowed myself to pivot, to change, and know that as long as I'm moving forward, that eventually you'll start to figure things out.
You just keep moving forward. And even though things aren't fully clear, some things you want to have, set up what your business model is and so forth. But you want to make sure, that you have a plan, but the back end could be a little foggy. And as you move forward, it'll start clearing and it'll open itself up to you. And that's the spiritual part of running a business, is that, you keep moving forward, things will clear up and you'll get to a point where you'll find your actual goal.
And is that becoming more self-aware as well? Yeah. And realizing that as those things start to appear, you have to understand that this is maybe the direction that you have to move in, and you have to be aware of that.
Yep. And having patience for that to uncover. The other number 2, so I went from embracing, and this one is don't embrace scaling. So let me, I'm going to make a lot of VCs get over tight over this one. But what I'm trying to say is early stage, don't worry about scaling your business. Worry about getting your idea out, possibly making money, or get eyeballs on your site or whatever you ultimately want to get in the beginning. But don't worry about scaling. If you start thinking about scaling early, I will tell you it's a recipe for failure. Don't worry about scaling until there's time to scale. Way too often people, think starting a new business requires scaling immediately. And I say, you got to keep flexible. You got to, and again, it's the same scenario. There's ambiguous things going on out there. So you're embracing the ambiguous outcome, the unclear outcome. And you're also embracing setting up all your processes for something that really doesn't have a full development yet. So worry about, for me, it was, let me try to make money first. Let me get the first dollar in the door. before I start even considering the word scaling. So, people push that. I deal with, VCs that look for scaling, and I get it. Once you get to the VC stage, you want to see the process, what scaling would look like, but you don't have to have it out and done. And prior to even getting to a VC, just creating a business, and prior to getting to a venture capitalist, I have to be more aware of the audience that everybody doesn't understand just what VC is.
Right.
But, once you try to pitch your company, you got to have the thought of what scaling is going to look like and so forth. But prior to that, don't embrace it. Don't make it a big part.
And you say it's a recipe for failure. So is that, when you say a recipe for failure, is that where you find most companies in your experience, or just, looking out, really anywhere when you see companies start to fail or they're on the precipice of failing? Is it because they're trying to scale too early, or it's just because they've only focused on scaling? They haven't focused on the foundation and actually getting traction, getting some money, and
yeah, both are right. You're absolutely correct. Both are right. Sometimes I do see people spending so much time, and to me, it's kind of I don't know. To me, it's kind of a lazy way to do things. Like, got to get everything set up before I can even properly do business, which is ridiculous. You got to, the great marketing author out there, Seth Godin, talks about shipping. And I love that word. He's like, get your shit out there. Get it in front of people, whether you're creative or whatever. Get it out into the marketplace. Apple and Microsoft and all these companies, Apple to more recently, used to push out the new iPhone with all the bugs, with all the issues. And then they'd fix them on the fly. Yeah. Because they were not that worried about being yes, if it had major flaws, I get it. But they weren't worried about the little warts that were on the product. They could fix that. The important thing was to get it out to the customer. People were anticipating, waiting, getting it out. Microsoft would do that. Microsoft was the ultimate company that did that. They would push their operating system out. There was a million different bugs and issues. People would lose their minds, but everybody loved Microsoft. And they knew they'd get it right eventually. Right. And eventually, as time went on, Microsoft learned how to just ship stuff out that was perfect. But they had to go through that time of imperfect to get to perfect. Right. Right.
I think shipping also allows you to get the feedback that you might not be able to get when it's so internal, when it's just the company and saying, okay, well, I need to get this perfect, but you're going to get it out there to somebody or a bunch of people. And they're going to say, hey, but what about this? What about that? And it's things that you never even considered before.
Yeah. Yeah. We can even go as simple as talking about this podcast, right? You and I spoke about getting this out, and we wanted to get it out. And you know what? There were a couple early episodes. I didn't love that much after listening to them. But I know we're going to get better. We're continually getting better. Right. So, but we got to get those out. Yeah. I can't sit there and go, you and I can't sit and go, oh, we're worried about this. I said this, I meant to say this. Screw it. Get it out. Ship it. I am, a huge proponent of action. You got to keep rolling. So anyway.
Happened with this episode. Not being on video this time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Pushed it through.
Yep. So the other one is, so we talked about, the last one was don't embrace scaling. And then the other one is embracing focus, which, in this crazy freaking world we live in, it's so easy to be unfocused. Probably the easiest thing in the world to do is to be unfocused. So you need to embrace time to focus on what needs to be done. And whether that's alone time or having a coach or a mentor, working with someone, you need to have that time to focus and reflect on yourself and on your business. Without that time, again, another recipe for failure. You got to sit and measure where you're going, what you're doing, evaluate yourself. If you're not great at doing that, maybe go get a coach. Maybe find a mentor. bounce things off of people, but you got to have a perspective. I had a great, consultant coach that I work with for years. We talked about Richard Maggid. And one day I want to get him on the show as well. But he helped me figure certain things out. I did it at first alone, and I was successful. But then as time got on and I was busier, I needed to spend that focus time, and I couldn't put it into my day. I used to put it into my calendar, and I would go, oh, I can't get to this. But I had an appointment with him. I had to put it in my calendar, and I had to be able to talk about those things with him. And he helped me, work through things, which is great. And, and whether it could also be therapy. If, it could be mental health. But you need someone to bounce things off of if you can't utilize yourself to bounce those things off of. But you got to be square with yourself. You got to understand that this is a requirement. Focus is important. We're living in such a crazy, unfocused world that there's no other direction but to get focused and get better.
And do you think those coaches, mentors, like how Richard was, being able to share your concerns or trying to get more focused, do you think that person also needs to be critical at the same time and constructive and give you criticism in certain things when you are trying to share things out? Because, a lot of times a therapist will listen and tell you about certain things that you need to do or to, try to help and move you along. And I guess can add a little bit of, critical thinking or make you do things a little bit differently. But I think a coach mentor needs to, do you agree with that as well?
They need to put your hands to the fire. It's all about you. I mean, when it comes down to it, whether it's a coach, whether it's a therapist, whatever you're dealing with, it's all about you. You don't expect, you have a mental health problem, you're dealing with depression, and you go sit in front of a therapist and you tell about your life. They're not going to cure you. You're going to cure you, but they're going to lead you down that path to understand how to cure yourself.
Right.
So that is, to me, that's where the rubber hits the road, is understanding that we have all the power within us. Nobody takes that away, even when you're in therapy. It's only them helping us realize what we need to realize, what's important. But I've had my hand to the fire where, a therapist or a coach like Richard would say to me, you've been talking about this forever, but you're not doing anything to solve the problem. And, I think you better step up. Right. So that, to me, that's where the rubber hits the road for me. The other one is, so we did embrace focus. The other one not to embrace is failure. And this is I'm going after some of the gurus out there to say, you need to fail often and love failure. Screw that. That's my opinion. Yeah. My opinion is, you don't need to love failure. You don't need to embrace it. It's a necessary evil. And as much as it sucks, and most importantly, the bottom line is that you learn from it. It's not something you want to do. You're going to do it often, but it's almost like stepping on dog crap. You don't like it, but maybe when you're walking through a pile of dog crap, you have to step in it. And that's really what failure is. So don't embrace failure. Actually get mad at failure. One of the things most important, and this comes from my past, don't do your best not to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I will tell you, I did that. I made mistakes. I went through business, and I talked about this in prior episodes. I went through business and I went through the same mistakes, and eventually I stopped myself and said, I'm not doing this anymore. This is insane. Right. That I am repeating things. I'm in this repetitive mode, and I got to get out of it. And I push myself out of it. Right. And from that, once I realized that and recognized that, never made the same mistake. I make mistakes and I fail things constantly, but I never made the same mistake. Right. And again, I think that's what helped me build my last company, Thrive, and, and be able to sell that in 3 years, as opposed to building out like NHA, which took like 15 years.
Right.
I learned lessons, turned it around. I mean, both were successful, but I was able to get that success quicker. And I also was much better. I learned as I went along, even with NHA, I learned to bring in the right people.
Right.
And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, about being self-aware and awareness of others, and really understanding that others, we'll talk about this a little bit, but others are definitely supported my success. And it was those great people that I brought in, like yourself, who worked for me. It was those great people that I don't, forget about, that they were key. My last company in Thrive, our national director and our director of operations and my two partners were all, pivotal in growing that business. I worked on the strategy. They worked on the rest, and built that out. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as we talk about awareness. And then the last one, so it was embrace failure. Don't embrace failure. Scratch that. Don't embrace failure. And the last one is embrace passion. And when I talk about embracing passion, I mean focusing on your purpose and your story for your company and what that all looks like and why you're here, what excites you about your customers, and why should you come to work every day? Right. And why should the employees come to work every day? You got the passion you create for the business has got to be created. And I did this often at NHA, was thanking employees for this dedication that we did. We're literally, involved in the healthcare industry and saving people's lives, right. Patients and healthcare workers. So those were like really cool things that we can talk about. Thrive that that we just sold. What was amazing, I would get in front of my therapist and just look at them and go, I tell them the story, whatever I came through, whether it was my brother's suicide and things like that I dealt with. And this is mental health. And I'm like, I am so amazed of the work that all of our therapists do in these school districts, working with students who have anxiety, depression, possibly suicidal thoughts. So giving that baby away and selling that company recently, made me kind of feel melancholy in a way, because we were doing such great things. And my goal was to sell that so it can go to the next level. And I'm glad that it's going there.
Sure.
It's very cool. So embrace your passion. So those are the 5 kind of things that I embrace and don't embrace. I wanted to repeat in starting a business and, start an entrepreneurial journey.
And do you think that, kind of taking a step back into this whole conversation that we were having, regarding pivoting and, having a plan and realizing that, there's this ambiguous path that's in front of you, as long as you're pushing forward, you'll find that direction. Passion has to play a huge part in that to really find that part of it and to want to continue and being self-aware enough to realize, okay, maybe the direction that I thought I was going to go in, this is going to work out a lot better. And you go that way. But passion, I think, drives that. Yeah. No, it's the purpose. You want to have a purpose. Everybody needs a purpose in life. It's hard to exist without a purpose. Right. Yeah.
So the business should be your main purpose when you're launching it.
Right.
For sure.
You mentioned that you wanted to go over a little bit about the awareness of people that you work with and so forth. I'd like to expand on that.
Yeah. I think what's really important is acknowledging the great people that have been responsible, part of my success along the way. And, I want to thank all of them. There's so many that we worked with at NHA that I work with my career education schools that I built, and then getting into the behavioral health industry, the 2 companies that I built. And so, there was just, aside from my 2 partners that were with me in the last 2 businesses, who are great and, friends to this day, which is, a rarity. Prior to that, I was a lone wolf and I did everything myself. Although I got a lot of support from my wife and family and so forth. But being a lone wolf, I wasn't really a lone wolf. I had great people that work with us, great people that, working with you and working with so forth. So, you need to give credit where credit's due, and you need to value your employees to a point where you have self-awareness. You have awareness of their strengths, their weaknesses, and how they feel. And that brings in the emotional intelligence. How do they feel about the company? The one thing I've been able to do is really get a good feel for the people I work with, and knowing that, understanding them, not all the time, but trying to, and changing. Sometimes I've been overzealous with certain things and then realizing, you know what? I think I'm annoying. I got to step back, so you really got to give and take, but it's an awareness. It's an awareness of the people you work with and realizing what they're doing every day, coming to work every day, pushing through, and, they may not be high up in the company scale. It might be just doing customer service, but I really, really appreciated every single one of them. And I still do. Because I think they're, everybody that was part of any company that I was involved in, to me, are just such important people. To this day, I'm still friends with tons of them on Facebook, and LinkedIn and so forth. And it's great to see their lives coming together and moving forward. So I wanted to put that out there, and it really is pivotal to this discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because a lot of people take for granted the people that are around them a lot of times. And they won't think about the fact that, they'll believe they are the one. They'll believe that they're what drives the company, what drives the business, what drives the sales, whatever it might be. And they don't realize the intricacies of all these other people that are involved in it, whether or not they're employees, whether or not it is just a solopreneur type of business. Yeah. Then you have to look at your customers, your clients, the people that are buying your stuff and saying, okay, what am I doing to make sure that I'm changing their life, by doing this, but also understand what their life is and what they've brought to you to make sure that you're able to continue to create the best things, out there.
Yeah. For sure. And not to get political, but really look at the president or, running our country. It should be a team. We should look more at the team of people that a president. So I'm not going to, go through my, what politics I agree with or I don't. I'm an independent, so I will tell you that. But ultimately, you need to understand. I think if I was voting, I want to know what is the team you're bringing in? Who are you bringing in to run this country? Why can't we have a president that has a great team around them going in? When you're running for office, why not talk about your team? So to me, that's kind of a interesting thing, because it's not me and me alone. It's all about, if I'm coming in as CEO or coming in as president, I want to make sure I got the great team around me that are smarter than me too. You want people smarter than you. And there are some presidents in the past that had that, they weren't exactly knew it all, but you respected that. You respected the fact that they brought in a team and they've built it. So for me, it's about, what do you, success really doesn't just mean it's you and by yourself, because it never really is. It's all these other people, whether it's vendors, whether it's customers, whether it's employees, whether it's, spouses and so forth. Right.
And speaking of people, we have these couple of questions. Questions to kind of go over.
Yeah,
I just want to ask.
You pulled this on me. I didn't realize you were going to do this.
Yeah.
I know we talked about it, but that's cool. Good.
One last thing that I want to just ask before we get into these few questions.
Audience questions. Cool.
Yeah. Is it a red flag for you when an entrepreneur comes in pitching their company, pitching their business for an investment or something like that, and they talk all about themselves and they don't talk about their team, and they don't recognize that team. Is that a red flag for you? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's not an audience question.
No, just following up on.
Yeah. No, that's a red flag. Of course. Yeah. Really in an early stage company, you want to understand who you're working with. Could be a few people, sometimes you get, technical, but you want to learn, we want to meet those people even before I invest. I want to talk to some of the people that are part of that person's company or people that are on their advisory board, or, when you're starting a company, you're out pitching, you got to get an advisory board and you got to get all that. And who are these people? I look at them sometimes and they go, oh yeah, we got this great person on the advisory board and, they're an advisor. And I'll go like, did they invest in the company? And they're like, no. Yeah. And then I ask, and that question opens up a lot of other questions.
Sure.
Like why didn't they invest if they're, high up in the, what are they, why are they sitting back? I sometimes there's an understandable answer to that, but I do ask that question often.
Right. So first question that we had that came in, and if anybody's interested in sending in some question to us as well, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, soon to be YouTube, and obviously the podcast. But
Underdog Wisdom.
Underdog Wisdom. Feel free to send us a DM. Let us know what questions you have, and that's exactly what Carlos from New York actually did. And Carlos's question is, how do you make sure that you are always innovating and staying ahead of your competition?
Right. Interesting. I guess staying ahead of the competition is kind of like riding the curve. Being a leader in your industry is an effective way to see where things are heading. So studying the industry and having that understanding. A lot of mistakes I've made is getting like way ahead of it. So my problem was staying ahead of competition was always important to me, but sometimes I would get too ahead of the curve. And I learned that there's kind of this like sweet spot that you got to be. Sometimes you could be too innovative and that causes issues. So for me, staying ahead of the curve, you don't want to overshoot where you are. But and part of that is listening to your customers, really understanding what they have to say, and finding out what's more effective. Actually, even more important is actually watching your customers, if you can, seeing what they post or what they do, getting an understanding. It's great to ask questions, but it's also great to study the customer and understanding. So when you getting ahead of the curve, and a good example that was in the behavioral health world, we were pushing this certification that we wanted to do. It was slightly ahead of the curve. Now is a good time where it's starting to take, but we were creating something for workers in the behavioral health world that were working in school districts as assistants to the therapist. We were creating a certification. In the beginning, it didn't take place. Now it's starting to. It's kind of interesting, right? When I sold the company, that piece started happening, it was very recognizable by myself that I overshot being innovative. So you got to be really tight. Listen to the customer. Again, like I said, more importantly is understanding. Innovation is scary. You have to really understand your customers' fears. You want to be a problem solver, but you just don't want to get too hard, too fast above the curve. So my problem was always, like I said, getting way ahead of the curve. You got to keep that sweet spot. You got to slow down, understand, acknowledge, and know what's coming up next.
And is that sometimes a little bit of, I don't know if ego is the right word, but is it kind of sitting there saying, well, this is more what I think should happen, as opposed to really kind of looking at what your customers or clients or potential people are actually needing or trying to solve their problems instead of thinking that you're trying to solve their problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Awesome. So the next question, this is a good one, comes from Valerie from Minnesota.
Ooh, okay.
What is your approach to managing risk and making important decisions?
Managing risk and making important decisions.
Making important decisions.
For me, again, it kind of goes down the same process. You don't want to go into a point where things are becoming, you're just making moves to make moves. Sometimes you get to this point where you feel like things aren't happening so fast, and you have to take risks and move forward with something. You don't always have to take risks, especially when things are going well. Taking risks is when the risks that you take are early on in the business. You don't take as many risks later in the business, because especially if things are moving along. You don't want to be just this guy that takes risks for the sense of taking risks. So for me, risk taking is early stage. It's that pivoting. It's jumping around, moving. The educated risks are some of the things that you're going to do as time goes on, but you're going to get better at. It's almost like gambling, but you have all the knowledge of where that roulette wheel is going. You understand the odds. You put your odds down are 30-1. That's a super risk. Your other odds is 50-50 or 48-52, and that odds. So those are the things that you need to do, but you don't want to risk for sake of risk. Really becomes, as time goes on and as the business builds, it becomes more of a safer play to take an educated risk and have knowledge before. Early on, like I said, you got to make things happen.
So if you were to do it later on, would that only be where that you kind of have it figured out and you do almost like a Pareto, like 80-20, like, okay, we're going to gamble with, this 10-20%, knowing that, hey, it could do very, very well and it might not. But at the same time, if it doesn't work out, we still have a lot of things going for our, in our favor still, regardless if this works or not. That's when you would take that, type of risk.
Yep, for sure. And, you have to understand, I mean, managing risks, and making important business decisions, you got to understand what your company's doing. Early on, you got to know what your burn rate is. And I'll explain. Burn rate is what you're spending monthly. So you got to understand, you can't take risks against that, what kind of money you have left. So you just need to understand, when you have no idea, and have no experience in this particular decision that you're making, it becomes a problem. So it becomes a problem when you're just throwing things into the wind. So, really getting an education about the risk that you're going to take certainly is going to help the odds.
Gotcha. All right. And the final question comes from Lee in New Mexico.
Okay.
What are some of the biggest or most unknown challenges that entrepreneurs face that kind of go unseen?
Wow. Okay. First thing that just hit me. The unknown challenge, being an entrepreneur. So let's just look at that. As an entrepreneur, the challenge to me for me, it was loneliness in making decisions. I think it probably is one of the loneliest thing, and you understand this and know it. It's a lonely business being an entrepreneur and trying to build something. Even when you have people to talk to, they don't necessarily understand everything that's going through your head and going through your mind. And you don't have that time to go, all right, I got to be aware of everybody. And you got so much going on. So loneliness in the way you feel, loneliness in making decisions, especially if you don't have anyone really to lean on. And I'm not saying our wives can't lean on, but sometimes they don't understand everything we're going through. So it's hard for that. So I had a lot of sleepless nights. And that's one of the reasons, if you can early on, to get a coach and get someone to help alleviate some of that loneliness. It's a lonely choice, especially in the early stages. There's isolation. So that's a challenge. The other challenge is really growing the business, building a brand. Building a brand is like, you really got to crawl before you walk, before you run. And the crawling could be a long time. So I look at that as that's a long, dark road. I'm not trying to be negative. It's a long, dark road in the beginning, trying to build your conceptual brand or product or your service, to recognize your brand or service. It's a tough grind. It's not an impossible grind. It's just a tough grind. So for me, the challenges of early stage entrepreneurism is those things. Eventually, when you start getting employees and you have key people, which I've had, I've brought into my business. I started as the lone guy, and then all of a sudden I got a team, and I got a great team. And all of a sudden they're asking questions or they're solving issues. And no longer do I need to be doing these things. Now the isolation starts lifting. But early on, there's some depression and loneliness. That's a challenge. So hopefully I answered that I think that was Lee, right?
Yeah.
New Mexico?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I think that's a great answer, because it's another thing to consider is that the loneliness, I think, is something that does really, like Lee said, goes unseen. And that's not the thing that's talked about a lot.
Yeah.
And for some people, they love that. They love that kind of doing things on their own, especially in the beginning. But there are some times, because I've had this conversation with my wife too, working from home for so long.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to school, you're seeing your friends, or you're seeing the people that you work with, you're having some kind of social interaction with people, at least.
Yeah.
When you're at home or when you're doing things kind of on your own, you're living what everybody else is the dream.
Yeah.
I get to do this, but at the same time, it's kind of like the only person I have to talk here is the dog.
Yeah.
or whatever it might be in the beginning. And then you also have a lot of people that sometimes are, on the other path, I guess you can say, that are, they're the ones that are out there, working their regular 9-to-5s or corporate jobs, whatever it might be.
And they think you're insane.
You try to talk to them and they're trying to steer you in different directions, or they get bored because it's, as an entrepreneur, I think a lot of people are very creative, and it sometimes surpasses, what.
Yeah.
And then at that point, at least for me, that's when I become at least self-aware enough for myself and social aware to sit there and say, fuck it. It's just no point in even talking about this anymore with them.
Absolutely. Sure.
So one last question that I have. Yep. This is my personal question, and we'll finish the episode with this.
Craig from New Jersey.
Yep. What is your biggest piece of advice around becoming more self-aware as a new aspiring entrepreneur?
Biggest piece of advice. Stop and just, sometimes shut up. Sometimes listen. Whether you're in the shower, out in nature, in a crowded room, take some time to listen and hear what people are saying and understand. That is the concept of self-awareness. Be aware of, take a walk in the woods and be aware of the birds and the animals and the ground and the sounds and the, nature. I'm not trying to be so fuzzy about this, but warm and fuzzy, but ultimately listen. To be self-aware, you got to be a good listener, and sometimes just closing your mouth and hearing what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in the woods, what's going on out there in the world. And, the more you do that, the better you get at understanding people and being aware. Once you start understanding them, and then you could start going within yourself and start thinking, why am I thinking this? Why am I letting this problem bother me? And start getting through those things. And again, a coach or a therapist are good. I think that I highly recommend it. I'm not saying everybody has to, but I highly recommend having somebody that you could bounce things off of that's not there for anything but to listen to you as well. So, listen to what's out there, and hopefully you have someone that's able to listen to you and help you reflect at least. So it all goes back to like this therapy that I talk about.
Yeah.
Or this coaching for sure.
Well, I think sitting in silence, like you said, allows you to, we're in a world now where we're just force-fed content.
Yeah.
Everything from podcasts to TikTok to Reels to everything.
Yeah.
And, we're doing a podcast right now. We're offering this information to anyone who's willing and wanting to listen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sitting in silence, kind of, not necessarily meditating. That's, I think that's a really good thing, because that's, for me, who's somebody whose mind is spinning all over the place all the time, just kind of sitting down and
try
just
to
thinking.
slow your mind down.
Because then you start to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, that's what I've learned. One of the things I learned when I was really kind of hyped up on, feeling like things were just moving so fast, was learning how to just kind of stop my mind. I don't even know if it was meditation. It's a form of meditation, but it's slow down the thoughts and be aware of when you're going fast. It's like, just want to be really, really, there's nothing wrong with being aware of, why things are bothering you, and, digging a little deeper and understanding what's bothering you, what's taking you off your game, So those are all the pieces that I look at.
Yeah. The Eckhart Tolle, or I don't even know if I said that right, or Eckhart Tolle or whatever, live in the moment.
Yeah.
That's when I noticed that when
Live
I'm having,
now.
or live, exactly. When I'm thinking about the problems and thinking about the issues, it's like, okay, well, just what's happening right at this moment.
Right.
Everything's fine right at this moment.
Maybe we encourage our listeners, after you listen to this, take like 5 minutes, to just like calm your brain down and relax.
Absolutely. So why don't you go ahead and do that? Thanks so much for listening to the episode. Hope you got some great information and found value from this, and have gained some more wisdom from the underdogs. See you on the next episode.